The Texas sun beat down hard over the dusty arena in Dry Creek County. Cowboys lined the steel rails, boots planted in the dirt, faces shaded beneath wide-brimmed hats. The auctioneer's voice rang out like a hammer against the silence, echoing through the dry air. Inside the holding pen, a beat-up paint horse stood alone, ribs visible, coat dull, one leg slightly lame. The sign above read, Lot 247, $100. Most folks weren't even paying attention. They'd already decided this one wasn't worth their time. Zebediah Rawgut stood just outside the ring, silent, arms crossed. 64, weathered by years on the land and by life itself. His gray beard was trimmed but tired, like the man wearing it. Since his wife passed the year before, he'd barely spoken to anyone. The ranch had gone quiet. Empty. Still. That morning, he came to the auction out of habit, or maybe out of hope. He didn't know which. When the gate opened and the horse limped out, the crowd chuckled. One man in a denim shirt muttered, "That one's more ghost than gelding." The auctioneer didn't even try hard. Lot 247. Do I hear $100? Silence. Heads shook. Then, unexpectedly, Zebediah raised his hand. 100, he said. The auctioneer blinked. We got 100. Anyone else? No one moved. Sold. To the man in the white hat. There were smirks. A few murmured comments. But Zebediah didn't care. He stepped toward the rail and took the lead rope. The horse flinched at first but didn't fight. His eyes, one deep brown, the other slightly clouded, locked with Zebediah's for a second too long. There was something in them. Not just fear. Something else. Something broken. He loaded the horse, now named Crimson, into his trailer and headed back down the long, hot road toward the ranch. No radio. No conversation. Just the steady hum of tires over cracked pavement. When they got home, Zebediah didn't lead Crimson to the barn. Instead, he opened the small paddock behind the house, next to the old oak tree where his son once played. He unhooked the rope, left hay and water, and walked away. That night, Zebediah sat on the front porch with a cup of coffee that went cold in his hands. Out in the pen, Crimson stood still under the moonlight, like a statue forgotten by time. Zebediah watched him for a long while, saying nothing. But deep in his gut, he knew it, this wasn't just a horse. This was the beginning of something. Something neither of them saw coming. The next morning, Zebediah Rawgut was already up before sunrise. The old coffee pot hissed on the stovetop as he watched the light begin to creep over the hills outside. From the kitchen window, he could see Crimson still standing in the same spot near the paddock gate, as if he hadn't moved all night. Zebediah took a slow sip, then grabbed his hat. It had been years since anything on this ranch had made him want to step outside before breakfast. As he approached the pen, Zebediah didn't say a word. He wasn't one for talking to animals like some folks did. But he moved slow, calm, showing the horse he wasn't there to hurt him. Crimson flinched when Zeb reached for the gate latch but didn't bolt. His eyes were locked on Zebediah, sharp and tired, like he was measuring him, waiting to see if this old man would be like all the others. When Zebediah dropped a few flakes of fresh hay in the trough, the horse backed up a step, then crept forward again, cautiously. No sudden movements. Just the sound of wind, wood creaking, and two creatures learning each other's presence. Later that day, Maisie Rue Dust Whistle stopped by unannounced, as usual. She stood on the porch with a pie in one hand and a curious grin on her face. "Heard you bought yourself a death wish at the auction," she said, handing him the pie without waiting for a greeting. Zebediah didn't respond right away. He never did. "He's got some fight left in him," he finally muttered, eyes scanning the paddock behind her. Maisie tilted her head. "And what about you, Zeb? Got any left in you?" The words sat heavy between them. That afternoon, Zebediah went back out with a brush. Crimson didn't run. He didn't welcome him either, but he stayed. Zebediah stepped slowly, letting the horse see every move. When the brush touched Crimson's shoulder, the muscles tensed. Zeb held the stroke, firm but steady, brushing away layers of dirt and dried blood. That close, he could see old scars. Long ones, thin ones. Some healed, some not. Zebediah didn't say a word, but something inside him stirred. The pain this animal carried was familiar. Too familiar. That night, Crimson finally laid down in the grass. Zebediah saw it from the porch. It might have meant nothing to someone else, but to a man like him, it meant everything. It meant the horse didn't expect to be beaten that night. That maybe, just maybe, he was starting to feel safe. Zebediah didn't smile, but his chest ached in a way it hadn't in years. Something was shifting. Quietly, slowly, like the wind before a storm. By the third day, Zebediah started noticing things. Small things. Crimson would lift his head when he heard the old man's boots on gravel. He didn't flinch at the sound of the gate latch anymore. When Zeb brought fresh hay, the horse moved toward him, not with trust, but with something close to curiosity. And that was enough for now. Zebediah had spent his whole life fixing broken fences, patching roofs, and mending machines. But this kind of repair? This was slower, quieter, and it started from the inside out. That morning, Zeb brought a saddle blanket to lay near Crimson, not to use, just to let him get used to the scent. As he tossed it gently over the fence, the horse stepped back, nostrils flaring. Zeb waited, leaning on the post, saying nothing. A hawk cried overhead, and the wind pushed dry leaves across the field. After a minute or two, Crimson stepped forward and sniffed the fabric, ears twitching. Zebediah didn't move. He knew all too well what fear did to a body. Sometimes it made you freeze. Other times it made you run. But the hardest part was learning when it was safe to stay. Later that afternoon, Zeb took a walk out past the barn. The tools were rusting in the shed. The tractor hadn't started in 2 years. The land was still breathing, but just barely. Martha had always said the ranch needed love, not just labor. He hadn't understood her back then. Now he did. Love wasn't loud. It was consistent. It showed up even when it hurt to do so. Near the fence line, he found Boaz Grizzlehorn sitting under the pecan tree. Zeb didn't recognize him at first. 12 years old, skinny as a rail, and looking more like his mother than his father. "Mom dropped me off," Boaz said, eyes fixed on the ground. "Said you didn't have a choice." Zeb stared at him a long while. No hug. No welcome. Just a nod toward the house. "You hungry?" he asked. Boaz shrugged. "I guess." And that was the end of that conversation. That night, Zebediah made grilled cheese and tomato soup, Martha's old recipe. He didn't say much during dinner, and neither did Boaz. But afterward, the boy wandered out to the paddock and stood near Crimson, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. The horse watched him but didn't move. Boaz stayed a few feet away and whispered something Zeb couldn't hear. Whatever it was, Crimson didn't run. From the porch, Zebediah watched the 2 broken things out there, the boy and the horse. Both abandoned. Both carrying more pain than they could speak. And for the first time in a long time, Zeb wondered if maybe healing wasn't supposed to happen alone. The next morning, Zebediah found Boaz already outside, leaning against the fence with a half-eaten apple in his hand. The boy looked like he hadn't slept much, dark circles under his eyes, a stiffness in his posture. Crimson stood on the far end of the paddock, watching him the way wild animals do, from the corner of the eye, never straight on. Zeb approached quietly, coffee in hand, and stood beside the boy without saying a word. "You think he was ever free?" Boaz asked, still looking at the horse. Zeb took a long sip before answering. Maybe. Long time ago. Before someone broke him. Boaz didn't respond, but the way he bit the rest of the apple said enough. He understood more than a boy his age should. Zeb didn't ask questions, not about why Boaz had been dropped off without warning, or why the boy's father hadn't called. The silence between them was easier than the truth. Truth had sharp edges. Later that day, Zeb and Boaz worked on the old chicken coop. It didn't need repairs, it was just something to do. The boy held nails while Zeb hammered. No one spoke for a while. Then, out of nowhere, Boaz said, "Mom said you and Dad don't talk because you think he disappointed you." Zeb stopped mid-swing. The hammer hovered above the wood like it weighed 100 pounds. "That so?" he muttered. Boaz nodded. "But I think maybe it's 'cause you disappointed yourself." The words hit deeper than Zeb wanted to admit. He didn't reply. Just drove the next nail harder than necessary. That evening, Maisie Rue Dust Whistle came by with blankets and sass. She waved at Boaz like she'd known him his whole life and handed Zeb a folded note. "Wade won't answer his damn phone, so I figured I'd let him know his kid's still breathing." Zeb took the note and nodded, the lines on his face deepening. Maisie looked over at the paddock and smiled. "Crimson looks a little less ready to kill someone. That's progress." Then she leaned in and whispered, "So do you, Zeb." After she left, Boaz walked out again with a brush Zeb had left by the barn. He didn't ask permission. He just walked up to the fence and waited. Crimson came closer, step by step, and finally let the boy touch his side. The brush moved slowly, carefully, over matted fur and scars. Zeb watched from the porch, heart heavy. Something was shifting. And this time, it wasn't just the horse. The morning came heavy with clouds, the kind that warned of a storm but hadn't yet decided whether to rain. Zebediah stood near the paddock with his hands in his coat pockets, watching as Boaz slipped inside the gate with ease now. Crimson didn't back away like he used to. The boy had a gentleness in him, the kind Zeb had never been good at showing. It made him proud in a quiet, aching way. But pride was tangled up with regret, and that feeling was starting to scratch at Zeb's chest again. While Boaz brushed Crimson's side, Zeb walked out to the mailbox, the same dirt path he'd walked for over 40 years. Inside was a single yellowed envelope. No return address. The handwriting was sharp, familiar. Inside, a folded piece of paper read only one line. "Ask Cletus Firegrove where that horse came from." Zeb froze. The name hit like gravel in his gut. Cletus had been the one managing the horse pens at the auction. They'd known each other since Zeb was a younger man, and not always on good terms. Crimson wasn't just any abused horse. Zeb could feel it now. There was something beneath the surface, and someone didn't want it uncovered. Later that day, Zeb made the drive into town. Boaz stayed behind with Maisie Rue, who'd shown up again, just to make sure y'all weren't living off canned beans and prayer. Zeb pulled into the dirt lot behind the auction barn where Cletus worked part-time. The building looked smaller in the overcast light, like it was sinking into the earth. Cletus was there, smoking on the back steps, his old cap tilted forward. "I need to ask you something," Zeb said, stepping up with purpose. Cletus looked him up and down. "You got that horse still?" Zeb nodded. "You should have left him there," Cletus muttered, flicking ash to the ground. "He wasn't meant to come back to a place like this." Zeb's jaw tightened. "What does that mean?" Cletus hesitated, then sighed. "That horse, he came from a seizure outside of Junction. Real bad scene. Blood, chains, starvation. He wasn't the worst one, but he damn near died. Fed said no one should take him. He was dangerous. Some guy paid cash under the table to get him cleared for auction. Name ain't on any papers. I didn't ask questions." Zeb felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He turned without another word and walked back to his truck. The truth was darker than he'd imagined, and now Crimson wasn't just a broken horse. He was a key to something much bigger. And someone clearly didn't want that key found. By the time Zebediah got back to the ranch, the wind had picked up, and the sky was turning that heavy greenish-gray that warned of more than just rain. Maisie Rue stood on the porch with her arms crossed and a look that didn't need words. "You left Boaz with me like I'm some kind of babysitter," she said. Zeb just nodded, too lost in thought to argue. He didn't tell her what he'd learned from Cletus. Not yet. His mind was too tangled. That horse wasn't just a rescue. He was a warning. Out by the paddock, Boaz sat in the dirt beside Crimson, humming something under his breath. The horse had started following him around the pen like a shadow. There was trust there now, real trust, and Zebediah couldn't help but feel protective of it. Whatever Crimson had lived through, it had carved into him the way war carved into men. And now Zeb feared that whoever wanted that history buried might come looking to erase it for good. That night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Zeb stayed up late going through old boxes in the shed. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but something inside him said he'd missed a piece of the puzzle. In one box, under a stack of yellowed vet records from decades ago, he found a photo he hadn't seen in years. Wade, his son, standing next to a younger Zebediah and a mare that looked almost identical to Crimson. The caption on the back read, "Bonnie, 1997. His heart kicked. Could Crimson be her offspring? The next day, Zeb called in a favor. Roxable Thunder June, the local vet and one of the few people in town who didn't treat him like a relic, agreed to stop by and take a closer look. After inspecting Crimson's teeth, build, and gait, she shook her head. "He's got that same bone structure your mare had. I'd bet money he's from that line, but without papers, it's just a hunch." Zeb's jaw tightened. Hunch or not, someone worked hard to get him erased. That evening, after Roxable left, Boaz found a note nailed to the barn door. Sloppy handwriting, wet from rain, barely legible. "Return the horse or you'll regret it." Zebediah read the words, then looked out toward the paddock, where Crimson stood calm and quiet beside Boaz. A chill moved through him. This wasn't just about the past anymore. Someone out there was watching. Someone who still believed Crimson belonged to them. And Zebediah Rawgut knew one thing for certain. He wasn't about to give that horse back. The next morning, the ranch was too quiet. Not peaceful, unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, not even the distant hum of trucks from the county road. Zebediah stepped out onto the porch with his coffee and noticed it immediately. The padlock on the barn had been snapped. Not picked, cut clean, as if someone had come in the dead of night with purpose and no fear. He set the mug down and pulled his old revolver from the drawer near the door. He hadn't used it in years. Today didn't feel like a day to keep it shelved. Inside the barn, nothing was stolen. But someone had been there. Straw was kicked up, a tool rack had been knocked sideways, and worst of all, Crimson had deep cuts on his flank. Fresh. Not deep enough to kill. Just enough to send a message. Boaz found him first and ran to get Zeb, his voice panicked. "He's bleeding." Zeb knelt beside the horse, calming him with one hand and inspecting the injury with the other. "Damn cowards," he muttered under his breath. He didn't call the sheriff. Zebediah didn't trust what came with that. Too many questions, too much paperwork, and not enough action. Instead, he called the one person who'd understand, Buckland Coyote Grave, a retired sheriff who used to ride the county hard back in the 80s. Buckland arrived within the hour, boots dragging through the gravel like they had something to say. "You stirred up a hornet's nest, Zeb," he said after seeing the cuts. "And I got a feeling that nest has teeth." Buckland lit a cigarette and leaned against the porch rail. "I remember that seizure in Junction. That wasn't just animal cruelty. That was part of something bigger. Illegal stud operations, dirty money, even dogfighting in the same lot. Crimson might be proof they're still running under the radar. Zeb looked out at the paddock where the horse now stood, wrapped and calmer. "He's not going anywhere," he said. Buckland exhaled slow. "Then you'd better be ready for what's coming." Later that night, Boaz refused to sleep in the house. He dragged his sleeping bag out to the barn and parked himself right beside Crimson. "He didn't give up on me." "I ain't given up on him," the boy said with quiet defiance. "Zeb let him." There was strength in that choice, something Zeb wished he'd had when Wade walked away all those years ago. And sometime after midnight, as Zebediah sat on the porch with his revolver on his lap and the stars hiding behind clouds, he saw headlights at the far end of the property. They didn't belong to anyone he knew. The headlights stopped at the far end of the driveway, just beyond the cedar trees that lined the road like old sentries. Zebediah stood up slowly, one hand resting on the revolver. Boaz stirred in the barn, poking his head out when the engine cut. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the truck door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped into the dark. The moment Zeb saw the stance, the walk, the way the hat tilted slightly to the left, he knew. Wade Triggerthorne, his son, was back. "I figured you'd wait till things turned ugly," Zeb said flatly, not moving from the porch. Wade stopped 10 feet from the steps. "Maisie said there was trouble, and that you bought a horse that don't forget pain. Seemed like my kind of mess." He glanced toward the paddock, where Crimson stood quietly, watching them like he understood something important was happening. The silence between father and son was thick, old, and unfinished, like a wound left to rot instead of heal. Inside the house, Buckland Coyote Grave leaned against the wall, listening. He'd known this reunion was coming. "You ever tell him?" he asked Zeb quietly. Zeb shook his head. Wade was already stepping onto the porch, and the moment had arrived whether he liked it or not. "That horse," Zeb finally said, voice low, "might be your blood." Wade blinked. "What are you talking about?" Zeb turned and handed Wade the faded photo he'd found days earlier, the one with young Wade and a mare named Bonnie. "You remember her?" "Crimson's the spittin' image. She was taken from us, but not before she was bred. They stole her. Like, ran some backdoor deal when the ranch was struggling." Wade studied the picture, jaw clenched. "You knew and didn't tell me?" Zeb didn't answer. He didn't have a good excuse, only shame. Anger flashed across Wade's face, but just as quickly, it faded into something deeper, hurt. "I came back because of Boaz, not you. But now I see why he's here. Maybe he was meant to find what we both lost." Zeb looked away, but Boaz had stepped between them now, small frame holding firm. "He's not just a horse," the boy said. "He's a second chance. For all of us." Suddenly, a loud crack split the air, the back fence. Someone had broken it. Crimson neighed, wild and alert. Zeb didn't hesitate. He grabbed the rifle hanging by the door and ran toward the sound, Wade close behind. This time, the danger wasn't a whisper. It was here, and it came with boots. Zebediah reached the broken fence in seconds, rifle clenched in his hands, heart pounding like a war drum. Wade was right behind him, flashlight sweeping through the dark. The wind howled, kicking up dust as they moved toward the paddock's far corner. Crimson neighed again, louder this time, more frantic. Then came the snap of wood, the thud of hooves, and the sharp crack of something metallic. They weren't alone. 2 figures moved in the shadows near the trees. One held a crowbar, the other a rope. "They're here for the damn horse," Wade hissed, raising the beam of light. The men froze like animals caught in a snare. One of them, thin, twitchy, face covered in a bandana, took a step forward. "That horse ain't yours," he balked. "He belongs to someone who paid good money for bloodstock." Zeb didn't lower the rifle. "He belongs to no one now." Then came the sound that stopped them all cold. Crimson, charging. He moved faster than they thought he could, hooves thundering against the hard ground. The man with the rope turned to swing it, too slow. Crimson barreled into him, knocking him hard into the dirt. The other one lunged at the horse's flank with a crowbar, but Wade tackled him from behind, fists flying. Zeb fired a warning shot into the air, and the sharp report echoed through the land like thunder. Maisie Rue's voice rang out from the porch seconds later. "Sheriff's on his way. You best be gone before your sins catch up with you." The two men scrambled, one limping, the other bleeding from the face. They disappeared into the trees, swallowed by darkness. Crimson stood still, nostrils flaring, sides heaving. Boaz ran to him, wrapped his arms around the horse's neck, whispering over and over, "It's okay. You're safe now. It's okay." Wade sat in the dirt, catching his breath. "You always did know how to draw trouble, old man." Zebediah finally let out a low chuckle, the first real one in years. "Guess I ain't changed all that much." He offered his hand. Wade took it. When Buckland Coyote Grave pulled up with flashing lights, Zeb handed over the photo and told him everything. The sheriff nodded slowly, staring at Crimson. "This ain't just about horse theft," he said. "This is about a bloodline they thought was gone, one that connects to a whole network of crimes we never finished unraveling." Zebediah looked out at Boaz, still hugging the horse like it was his only anchor in the world. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, under the stars and the smell of smoke and dirt, Zeb knew they had finally taken something back. The next morning came quiet, like the land itself was catching its breath. The storm had passed, and with it, the fear that had gripped the ranch for days. Crimson stood peacefully in the paddock, sunlight catching the red in his coat, scars and all. Boaz sat beside him, legs crossed in the dirt, sketching something in a torn notebook. The boy had barely spoken since the night before, but his presence said enough. He wasn't afraid anymore. Neither was the horse. Inside the house, Zebediah poured 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one for Wade. The silence between them wasn't heavy now. It was something else. Familiar. Easier. Wade leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "So what now?" he asked. Zeb took a slow sip, then looked out the window. "We rebuild," he said. "Fence, trust, family, all of it." Wade nodded. For once, there was no fight behind his eyes. Maisie Rue came by just before noon, holding a small box tied with twine. "Found this in my attic," she said. "Figured it was yours before it was mine." Inside was an old halter, cracked and faded, with the name Bonnie etched in brass. Zebediah held it like it was made of glass. "Thought this was gone," he muttered. Maisie smiled gently. "Most things we think are gone are just waitin' to be found again." That afternoon, they all gathered by the paddock. Buckland Coyote Grave returned to give them news. The men who'd come for Crimson had been part of an illegal breeding ring stretching across 3 counties. The photo, the note, the stolen horse, it had all helped break the case wide open. Crimson had been the thread that unraveled the whole mess. "He's not just a survivor," Buckland said. "He's a witness." Boaz stepped forward and placed Bonnie's old halter around Crimson's neck. The horse didn't flinch. He leaned into the boy like he'd been waiting for that moment all his life. "Can I ride him someday?" Boaz asked. Zeb looked to Wade, then back to the boy. "You will. When he's ready, and when you are." The boy nodded, eyes locked with the horse's, heart full of something he hadn't known how to name before. Hope. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields gold, Zebediah sat on the porch, not alone this time. Wade was beside him. Boaz was still in the paddock, laughing. Crimson trotted slowly in the wind, light on his feet, almost like he was dancing. And for the first time in years, Zeb didn't feel haunted. He felt whole.